He forgot my birthday. Not the way you forget to pick up milk or the way you lose track of a dentist appointment. He forgot it the way you forget something that never mattered to you in the first place. I turned 42 on a Thursday in October. The leaves outside our kitchen window had gone orange and red, the kind of October morning you see on calendars. I came downstairs at 7 to find my husband at the kitchen table, reading something on his phone, coffee already half gone. He looked up. He said, "Morning." Then he looked back down. That was it. I stood at the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee and told myself it was fine. Maybe he had something planned for the evening. Maybe he was waiting. 18 years of marriage teaches you how to give someone the benefit of the doubt, how to stretch that benefit further and further until it covers things it was never meant to cover. I made breakfast for the two of us. Eggs, toast, half a grapefruit because he'd been watching his cholesterol. He ate without looking up from his phone. I went upstairs and got dressed for work. By noon, nothing. By 5, nothing. I drove home from the elementary school where I worked as a reading specialist, the radio playing something I didn't hear. I kept thinking, maybe there's a card on the counter. Maybe there are flowers. Maybe he made a reservation somewhere. There was nothing on the counter. What was on the counter was a cake box from the bakery on Clement Street, and for one brief, stupid moment my heart lifted. Then I read the handwriting on the receipt taped to the top. It said, biscuit, beef liver, carrot, peanut butter. Happy birthday, big guy. My husband had ordered a custom birthday cake for our dog. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. The dog, a 4-year-old golden retriever named Biscuit, came padding in and sat at my feet and looked up at me with his enormous, warm eyes, and I thought, he doesn't even know. He's innocent in all of this. The dog has done nothing wrong. My husband came in from the backyard a few minutes later, saw the cake box, and lit up. Actually lit up. He called the dog over, opened the box, set the little cake on the floor, and sang a full verse of happy birthday to the dog. He took a video on his phone. He laughed. He looked happier than I had seen him look in years. He never once said the word birthday to me that evening. I smiled. I made dinner. I did the dishes. I went to bed before he did and lay in the dark and did the math I'd been refusing to do for a very long time. 18 years. I had stopped working full-time when our son was born. I'd been the one who scheduled everything: the dentist appointments, the oil changes, the holiday travel, the teacher conferences, the birthday gifts for his mother and his sister, and every colleague who ever had a baby. I had kept this house running the way a body keeps running. All the necessary functions happening quietly, without credit, without anyone noticing until something stops. He forgot my birthday. And the dog got a cake. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would, but I didn't. There was something clarifying about it, the way extreme cold clarifies. I looked at the ceiling and I thought, this is who we are now. Maybe this is who we have been for a long time, and I just kept looking away. I want to be honest here, because this story is easier to tell with a clean villain, and I'm not sure that's entirely fair. My husband, I'll call him by his name, which is Warren, is not a cruel man. He never raised his voice at me, never called me names, never did any of the dramatic, terrible things that make a marriage obviously bad. What he did was quieter than that. He stopped seeing me. Not all at once, not on any particular day I could point to, but gradually the way a photograph fades. I became the person who kept the house and raised our son and made sure the world ran smoothly, and somewhere along the way I stopped being a person to him and became instead a system, a background process, invisible. The way running water is invisible until it stops. Our son, Trevor, was 16 and largely unbothered by the universe. He was a good kid, genuinely good. The kind of teenager who still said please and thank you and helped old women carry bags at the grocery store. He had gotten that from somewhere, and I told myself it had come from me, from the years of choosing my words carefully, of modeling patience, of all the invisible labor of raising a decent human being. But Trevor was 16 and had his own world, his own friends, his own phone full of life I wasn't part of. He hadn't remembered my birthday either. I didn't hold it against him. He was 16. I held it against the man who had stood next to me in a church in Burlington, Vermont, and promised to see me. Who had seen me, once, a long time ago. I didn't say anything to Warren that night, or the next day, or the day after. I started paying attention instead. I started noticing things I had trained myself not to notice. The way he made plans for the weekend without asking if I had anything in mind. The way he told stories at dinner parties, stories that featured himself and Trevor and their camping trips and their shared interests, and I appeared in those stories, if I appeared at all, as a vague domestic backdrop. Oh, Diane handled that. Diane takes care of all that. As if I were a service. A subscription he had been auto-renewing for 18 years without thinking about it. Diane. That's my name. I haven't said it until now because it almost felt strange to claim it. I had been Mrs. Calloway for so long. In November, I went to see my sister in Portland, Oregon, which was something I did every year. I had always treated those trips as a small pleasure, a long weekend where I could breathe. This time I stayed 5 days instead of 3. I walked around her neighborhood in the cold, past the coffee shops and the bookstores and the little restaurants with their menus chalked on blackboards. I watched people sitting alone at tables, reading, unhurried. I thought about what it would mean to have a life that was mine in the way that those afternoons seemed to belong entirely to themselves. I didn't say anything to my sister about what I was thinking. She would have had too much to say, and I wasn't ready for anyone else's words yet. I came home on a Sunday. Warren picked me up from the airport. He asked if I'd had a good trip. I said yes. He told me about something funny that had happened with the dog. I looked out the passenger window at the Bay Bridge and thought, I have a decision to make. The thing about being the person who handles everything is that you already know how to plan. I had a small savings account that I had been contributing to since before we were married. Nothing Warren had ever had access to, not because I was hiding it, but because it was mine. A habit my mother had drilled into me, always have something that is yours. Over the years, I had let it grow quietly, not enough to be life-changing, but enough to be a beginning. About $11,000. I made an appointment with a family law attorney. Her name was Adrienne, and she had an office in the financial district that was small and a little cluttered and felt nothing like the fierce lawyer in expensive office I'd been afraid of. She had a photograph of 2 kids on her desk, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she asked me questions in a way that made me feel like I was a person and not a case. She walked me through everything. California is a community property state, which meant the house, the retirement accounts, everything we had built together. Half of it was mine by law. She told me what to document, what to gather, what not to do. She told me what the process would look like. She gave me a realistic timeline. I left her office and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. Not because I was falling apart, because I was making real a thing I had only been thinking, and there is a difference between thinking and real. I spent 3 months getting ready, not secretly, not in a dramatic, covert operation way, but carefully. I organized the documents I would need. I opened a new checking account at a different bank and began redirecting a small portion of my paycheck. I had gone back to working full-time the year before, when Trevor started high school and the income was mine. I made lists. I researched apartments in Portland where my sister was, where I had felt that brief unnamed thing on those walks. I thought about Trevor every single day. He was 16, not 6. He was not the kind of child who needed to be shuttled between houses for custody arrangements. He had a life here, his school and his friends, and he loved his father, and I was not going to be the person who asked him to choose or to carry this. I was his mother. My job was to love him in a way that did not make him my reason to stay in something that was making me disappear. I told him before I told Warren. We were in the car after his Saturday practice, stopped at a red light, and I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me say that this has nothing to do with how much I love you. He turned his head and looked at me with those eyes that looked so much like mine. I told him that his dad and I were going to separate. I told him I was going to move to Portland. I told him he would always have me, that I would always come back, that he could always come to me. I told him none of what was happening was because of him. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, Are you going to be okay? I had prepared for anger. I had prepared for tears. I had not prepared for that. I said, Yeah, baby. I really think I am. I told Warren on a Tuesday night in February after dinner, while we were still sitting at the kitchen table with our coffee. I said it clearly and without dramatics because there was nothing dramatic left to say. I told him I had already spoken to an attorney. I told him the papers were ready. I told him I was moving to Portland in 6 weeks and that Trevor was staying here to finish his junior year. He looked at me the way people look at something that doesn't make sense to them yet. He said, What? I said, I'm leaving, Warren. I've been thinking about this for a long time. He said, Because of the dog's birthday cake. I almost laughed. I almost actually laughed. I said, The dog's birthday cake was the most recent thing. It wasn't the only thing. He wanted to talk. He wanted to go to couples counseling. He wanted to know what he had done, specifically, as if there were a list he could address item by item. I told him it wasn't about a list. I told him that for a very long time I had felt like a piece of furniture he was fond of but didn't see. He said that wasn't true. I said, Warren, what's my favorite book? He opened his mouth. He closed it. I said, What do I do when I can't sleep? What was I afraid of when I was young? What do I want? Not for the family, for me. What do I want? He had nothing. I was not angry when I said these things. I want to be clear about that. The anger had burned off months ago. Somewhere between that October night and the appointment with Adrian and the long walks in the November cold. What I had now was something else. A kind of steadiness. A sense of my own outline. I moved to Portland on a Saturday in March. I had arranged to sublease a furnished apartment from a woman who was spending 6 months abroad. Nothing grand, 2 bedrooms, good light, a small balcony with a view of the street below. I had shipped 2 boxes ahead of me. I packed the rest into my car. Trevor helped me load the car on Friday night. He didn't say much, but when we were done, he hugged me for a long time in the driveway, longer than teenagers usually allow. And I held on to him and thought, this is the thing I did right. Whatever else is uncertain, this is the thing I did right. I drove the 1,200 miles alone. I stopped in Medford for the night. I woke up early and drove the rest of the way with the windows down even though it was cold, because I wanted to feel the air. I want to tell you about the first morning in the apartment, because it is the part of this story that I keep coming back to. I woke up in an unfamiliar room with morning light coming through curtains I had not chosen, and there was no sound in the apartment. No dog moving around, no ESPN from the other room, no one else's presence shaping the silence. I lay there and I thought, this is mine. This entire morning is mine. I can do anything with it. I can do nothing with it. No one needs me to be anything right now. I stayed in bed until 9 o'clock reading a novel. I had not done that in years. My sister came over with coffee and bagels, and we sat on the balcony and talked for 3 hours without once discussing anyone else's schedule or anyone else's needs. I told her everything, the whole of it, beginning with the dog's cake and going back further to all the years of quiet disappearing. She listened the way good sisters listen, without interrupting, without one-upping, without making me feel like I had to minimize it. The legal process took about 8 months. California divorce, community property, no significant disputes. Warren was not a bad man, and when it came to the paperwork, he was not a vengeful one. We divided the retirement accounts. We sold the house and split the equity. What I walked away with was enough, combined with my own savings and my salary, to feel genuinely secure. I had been working remotely for the school district part-time during the transition. By June, I had found a position with a literacy nonprofit in Portland. Better hours, meaningful work. The kind of job where you come home tired in a way that feels like something rather than nothing. Trevor came to visit that summer for 3 weeks. We hiked in the gorge and drove down to Ashland and ate too much good food and watched movies late at night the way we used to when he was small. On his last night before flying home, he said, "Mom, you seem different." I asked him how. He thought about it. He said, "Like yourself." I don't know if he understood how much that meant to me. Maybe someday I'll find the words to tell him. Warren called me twice in the first month after I left. The first call was about logistics, the house, a bill, something administrative. The second call was different. He was quiet for a moment after I picked up, and then he said, "I keep thinking about the questions you asked me at the table. Your favorite book." I waited. He said, "I don't know why I didn't know those things." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I believe you." And I did. I just also knew that being sorry wasn't the same as it being fixable. Those are two different things, and we had spent 18 years confusing them. I want to say something to the women who might be reading this, who might be somewhere I was 2 years ago, lying in the dark, doing math, giving benefit of the doubt, telling themselves it isn't that bad. It doesn't have to be obviously bad to be wrong for you. You do not have to be hit or screamed at or publicly humiliated for your needs to be legitimate. The slow kind of disappearing. The kind where someone just stops seeing you, where you become the background of your own life. That counts. That is real. And here is what I know. The version of me who drove away from that house in March with 2 boxes and a road ahead of her was more herself than the version who had been keeping everything running for 18 years without once being asked what she needed. Not because leaving is always the answer, but because I had tried quietly in 100 small ways to be seen. And I had finally accepted that I could not make someone see me who had decided, without meaning to, that I did not need to be looked at. My 40th birthday, when I turned 42, I mean. I think of it as the birthday I actually got something. Not a cake, not flowers, something more useful. The moment of clarity that comes when someone shows you, clearly and without ambiguity, exactly where you stand. I stood up. I got in the car. I drove toward the life that was waiting for me to show up to it. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the cake, not the phone call from Warren, months later. The moment I keep returning to is smaller than any of those things. It's me lying in an unfamiliar bed in Portland on a March morning with gray light coming through someone else's curtains and realizing I had nowhere to be except exactly where I was. That was the thing I hadn't let myself want for a very long time. Just time that belonged to me, space that had no obligations built into its walls. I think about the years before that morning and I don't feel bitter about them the way I thought I would. What I feel is something closer to understanding, because here is what I know now. The life I had was not something that happened to me. I participated in it. I kept quiet when I should have spoken. I made myself smaller incrementally because it was easier than asking to be seen. And ease, I have learned, has a long-term cost that doesn't show up on the invoice for years. Warren is not the villain of this story. He is a man who stopped paying attention, and I am a woman who stopped insisting on being paid attention to. We taught each other, slowly and without meaning to, that I didn't need much, that I would manage, that I would take care of it. The The consequence of that lesson was 18 years of running a household, raising a son, holding a life together, and standing in a kitchen on my 42nd birthday watching my husband sing to a dog. Consequences are not punishment. That's something I've had to sit with. They are just results. What you put in, over time, becomes what you get back. And I had been putting in silence and patience and self-erasure for a very long time. What turned things around was not courage exactly. I want to be honest about that because I think the word courage makes it sound larger and cleaner than it was. What it actually was thinking. Real, sustained, uncomfortable thinking. The kind where you stop making excuses for what you see and let yourself understand it plainly. I sat with the facts of my life until I could no longer argue with them. That kind of clear-eyed honesty with yourself is harder than it sounds, and it matters more than almost anything else. And then there was the doing, the appointment with Adrian, the separate account, the conversation with Trevor in the car. None of those things were easy. Every single one of them required me to keep going on a day when it would have been simpler to stop. That persistence, the quiet, unspectacular kind, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that is what actually changed my life. Not one big dramatic decision, but 100 small ones, each one chosen when the easier option was available. Trevor asked me if I was going to be okay. I think about that question all the time. The fact that he thought to ask it, that tells me something about what I managed to do right, even in the years I was disappearing. You can be failing yourself and still be showing your children something true about how to move through the world with decency. I held on to that. I am okay. More than okay. I am a person again, with a favorite book and a morning routine and opinions about how I want to spend a Saturday. Small things. But they are mine. That's enough. It turns out, for a very long time, I didn't know that it could be.